Hey, I want to wave my thanks over to Ian over there. Hi, everybody. I'm Goldie Blumenstick, and I'm really so excited to start this conversation today. And I'm delighted to welcome the two guests that we have joining us. And they're going to be really helping me tackle the question that I think is really important right now with the changes in the economy that we're seeing and with an overdue push for greater equity in hiring. How is all that prompting, or is it, and how is it prompting really an imperative for higher ed to maybe reach a higher bar? Right at this moment, I'll ask my two guests to join me on camera here and unmute themselves and bring themselves up. Really excited to welcome Byron Ogeest. He's the CEO and the co-founder of Opportunity at Work. Hey, Byron. He's worked in the Obama White House in a number of different roles and related to economic policy. And also thrilled to have Anna Marie Kausau. She's been the president of the University of Washington since 2015. She's on the board of the American Council of Education. And apropos of our previous discussion about teaching, she's still a very active professor teaching and mentoring graduate students. Byron, Anna Marie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Byron, I'm going to start with you because I think maybe by now, some people have already started to see some of these little ads on the internet and maybe even on TV, this campaign that's underway right now to tear the paper ceiling. And that's a project that Opportunity at Work has been developing with the Ad Council. So why do we want to tear the paper ceiling? What's that all about?
Well, tear the paper ceiling refers, I'll start there, but I want to kind of go back then. Tear the paper ceiling is really, the idea behind it is that while skills are absolutely critical and learning is the way you get skills, and college is a really important modality of learning, it's not the only modality of learning. As it turns out, people are learning all the time, including learning on the job. And you've got 70 million people in this country who don't have bachelor's degrees, but they are part of the active workforce. They're working all the time. They have skills, and we talk about them as skilled through alternative routes, or STARS, skilled through alternative routes, STARS. And so, by the way, tens of millions of these folks have college credits. Some of them have associate's degrees. Many, but most of all, they're learning skills on the job. And we can talk about it later, but we have a database of skills distance from every job, from every other job, but we can show that there are just a lot of skills. And so if you think about education, higher education, as one component of skills development, and you think about work as another component, we can very quickly kind of eliminate the skills gap. But I don't believe it was colleges that suggested this, but many businesses have somewhat weaponized college degrees in the sense that they've said, well, if you don't have a college degree, we're not going to assess what skills you have, and we're not going to consider you for a job, whether you have the skills for the job or not. That's the paper ceiling. So the paper ceiling is not college. The paper ceiling is not a college degree. The paper ceiling is using the absence of a college degree to say, there's wheat and there's chaff. Your chaff, we're not going to consider you. That is a mistake. It's not just unfair. It's like actually wrong, because you're screening out millions of people. You have already 5 million stars who are in high wage jobs that this suggests they can't do. And you have 30 million stars in jobs that that are qualified for jobs that pay 50% more than the ones they're in. So it's not anti-college. We actually have a number of higher education institutions involved in it. But that's it. But you will be seeing it, especially you big TikTokers out there. Apparently we have 28 million views on TikTok, which was a surprise to me, but that's the fact. And there's 50 institutions involved in it, including big companies. And but I just want to be very clear from my standpoint. If you said, like, if you could only say in one word why we have a civilization, I think that word would be learning. And I think there's no question that the diversity and richness of our higher education institutions in the United States is an enormous source of advantage. And I think it's as simple as saying that 70 million other people also have something to contribute, and they should be able to work, learn, and earn to their full potential. It's really that simple.
Yeah, and I think just for the folks on the Zoom right now and for those tuning in later on, I think we're going to drop a few links into the chat that sort of show a few links to some of these little videos that have been running right now. Even they're not only on TikTok, but in some other places, so people can kind of get a feel of really this is an equity argument. This is a this is a fairness argument right now. I will say though, I've looked at the campaign and I've looked at some of the materials. One of the things that the campaign identifies as part of the paper ceiling are alumni networks, and we know a lot of colleges boast about these alumni networks as part of the advantage that you get when you go to college. So I know it's not. I'll take you at your word that it's not an anti-college thing, but it is a little bit maybe takes a little poke at what colleges teach or preach.
Well, I mean, I will just say, like, it's not the absence of an alumni network is the problem. You could have an alumni network, but right. I mean, so it's not, I guess what I'd say, Goldie, stars don't need something different than college graduates have. And college graduates don't automatically get the things you need for the labor market anyway. So I would see it as, I'm not saying that having an alumni network is a bad thing. I'm saying that, like, what the benefits of an alumni network, how do we get those benefits to more people, maybe by some other mechanism? So that's it. We're not trying to, the point is not to kind of remove knowledge or, ability to sort of navigate from some people. It's to try to increase it for everyone. And I think one thing you have to believe, which I certainly believe, it's not a zero-sum game. There's not some like fixed amount of jobs that people are arm wrestling over. If more people can contribute more, then there'll be more jobs, because work is solving problems, and we are very far from running out of problems to solve.
I've been reading the newspapers. I think you're right about that. We are far from that. Anna Mare, let's take Byron at his word. Let's take Opportunity at Work at its word, and that this is not an anti-higher ed campaign. But I don't know if you were able to tune in earlier. We heard Jason Wingard talking a little bit about sort of the role of college today, and it was very much about employment. But I guess if the college degree isn't really the only path to a great job, why college 2022?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And I think this is a great argument. It's not at all a new argument. I think that, my mentor's mentor, W.E.B. Du Bois, was very much involved in the same argument with Booker T. Washington at the turn of the century, with Booker T. Washington saying that the way that at that point it was Black men, that the way that the race would advance was through skills training and to focus on vocational. And W.E.B. Du Bois, who at the time was kind of an upstart, he was Harvard's first Black PhD and co-founder of the group that would become the NAACP, had the radical notion that it was just as important to invest in a deep and broad education to prepare for what we all agree is an unpredictable and ever-changing future where we don't know exactly what the skill set of the future is going to be. And he believed that the type of education that would stretch, and again, here we're talking about, turn of the century, Black men, before, when the inequality was really huge. And he felt that, it was important to invest in an education that would stretch their minds, visions, and sensibilities. He believed that the work of higher education was to inculcate intelligence, broad sympathy, knowledge of the world that was and is, and of humankind's relationship to it. In fact, a direct quote is, "The true college will only have one goal, not to earn meat, but to know the end and aim of that life that meat nourishes." And I think it's important that, yes, there is no question that getting a job is absolutely important, and that we want to equip our college students to be prepared for a job. But we also want them to be prepared in lifelong journey and lifelong learning, so they'll have a job number 2, 3, and 4. And I want to be very clear that I want to just push back on the notion of equity, because what I get worried about as we talk about this is a two-tiered system that you will have for middle and upper middle class folks. They will go to college, they will get a degree, And then, there's this other group that's going to get a set of skills and no degrees. And I think that that is exactly what would further create a divide and inequities.
So are you saying that in a way, the skills-based hiring would make it more harder for students to even think about the need to go to college, that they'll just be just as happy going to getting a skill set of training and then getting better careers?
I want to be clear. I have absolutely no problem with skills-based education. And I have absolutely no problem with, employers have to, that probably some employers have been relying too much on a college degree and not looking more broadly. What I am saying is if what we're talking about is trying to lift low-income students up, that the way to do that is to open up a college education to, in fact, make it less expensive. And I also think that we need to change how we think about college. The analogy that I sometimes use is that too often, we're building college as an album. It's 4 years, you go in this direction, you have to play the whole album all at one point. This is the playlist generation. And we do have to think about, a college degree and the college experience as, providing more avenues to go to college for a quarter or a semester, then to go to work for a while, then to come back, to be able to do some work online, some work in person. So I'm not saying that colleges don't need to change, but I'm saying that what a college education offers, and again, it's not only what happens inside the classroom, but it's what happens outside the classroom. We have 800 clubs that students can belong to, and they gain leadership skills in that way. They get to know, and I don't just mean an alumni network in terms of a network of privilege, quite the opposite. I mean, right now, we are living more and more in segregated neighborhoods where the upper class has very little contact with people that are different than them. Colleges are often the most diverse setting that students will ever be in. And so it's not just about these alumni networks. It is really about getting to meet, getting to interact, learning how to work with people from a broad range of skills that you're not going to get if you're taking some courses online here and there from the same neighborhood that you've lived in all your life.
I guess there's no way to disagree with any of that. I guess I'm wondering is, how is higher ed doing in that regard? Are universities showing students the value of this sort of interdisciplinary education? Are they showing students kind of the value of the bundle of higher ed? Alternatively, are they showing students adequate on-ramps and off-ramps to be able to step in and out of higher ed when they want? All these things that you talk about seem really important, but right now, I know it's very hard to describe higher ed as one big monolith. Of course, there's 4,000 colleges or something.
Exactly.
But you're on board of ACE. You oversee a major research university in Washington. You talk to a lot of your colleagues. How do you think the sector's doing right now?
I do think that there is a real push in that direction. And I'm hearing that not only from my colleagues across the United States, but also very much with the colleagues that I work with in Europe and Asia, et cetera, that there is much more. So for example, our university and many others are looking for, have applied for the Carnegie, in terms of engaged learning, and that has become very important to us. I think more and more of us have added internships, and more of us are doing programs in terms of study abroad to make sure that our students are really, prepared to work in an incredibly as we're now using the term global society, both in terms of investment in their local communities and sense of place, but also being able to work. So I think that interdisciplinarity is something that I think that we're all working more and more on. So I think that, again, our different institutions at different places, of course, are different institutions. Some institutions are in a very comfortable situation and maybe less apt to want to change. But I think that by and large, I see my colleagues, really, really interested in changing. We're also experiencing a generational change. in universities as baby boomers like me are beginning to retire. You have new people coming in that are much more comfortable with this notion of skill-based and interdisciplinarity. I think you heard Kathy Davidson, speak earlier about, a whole new way of looking at what the classroom is all about as just not being, four walls. So, I think we're moving in this direction. And quite frankly, I think that sense of universities and colleges is ossified and not able to change, that's one thing that COVID has shown is just how quickly we can move when we have the incentive to do it. And I think the changing demographics are providing that incentive.
Byron, are you seeing that from where you sit? I mean, obviously your day-to-day world is not in higher ed, but you certainly observe higher ed a lot, but you're talking to people who are in the workplace and trying to sort of break the nut, get into higher ed when they need to. Do you see this? Do the people that you talk to, do they see higher ed as this kind of more of an open system these days?
Well, higher ed is incredibly diverse in this country. So when I find that when people talk about higher ed, they tend to be talking about the piece of it that they happen to be familiar with. And so I don't find that I find that many opinions expressed about higher ed are not very informative. And so, but I would say just in terms of what Professor Kause is saying, I mean, first of all, Goldie, I completely agree with you. There's not President Kause, there's not a word that you said that I disagree with. I mean, it's
Professor is nicer.
Professor's nicer. Oh yeah, right. It'll get you like fewer targets on you, right, Professor? Okay. No, but in all seriousness, for example, of course, it's going to be a mix of needs. We need PhDs. We need like bachelors. I mean, like, it's a $17 trillion labor market. Why would there be one answer? I mean, it's sort of silly to think that there would be one right answer. And of course, part of what's like excellent about higher education in the United States is that there is a variety, right? There's a wide variety, but I think it doesn't extend nearly far enough. And so learning is the key. Learning is essential, and learning is essential throughout one's life, and right, for the workplace and for other reasons too. But so I just think my main objection to is I don't, on the higher ed side, because we mainly talk to employers, right? Like, so, and I think a lot of the problems are in employer behavior. And I think higher ed is frankly at very serious risk that because employers have placed on a bachelor's degree a burden that it was never meant to carry. The idea that in a world in which 40% of people are getting bachelor's degrees, that a bachelor's degree should be the only way that you could get a middle-class job is a recipe for higher education, for colleges, for universities to be demonized within society. Because if it's like, hey, if everyone's like, hey, if you didn't get through a bachelor's degree, well, that's your problem. Well, then I think the scrutiny to higher education, both on its cost, its accessibility, its completion rates, like all of that is going to be huge. By the way, I would say the other thing, given that people have very diverse lives, a lot of things change. I think one thing higher education, four-year universities absolutely should be doing is making it much easier to transfer credits. And I think when, Professor Kause, when you say, like, we've shown that we can change higher education when we have the incentive, what about when you don't have the incentive? Because right now, I think four-year universities have the incentive, or many perceive it, to make it more difficult to transfer.
Maybe they have the incentive, a better incentive now to accept it because enrollments are down. And maybe
well, that might be. So maybe that's the way. So maybe that's the way it goes. But I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not even talking primarily about students who are like leaving high school and deciding what to do next. I'm talking about 70 million people who are already over 25, who many, again, like probably 25 million of them have college credits. I don't know how many, but it's probably way
30,
more than 10 million would
39.
Yeah, okay, 30 million, but it's like 10, 20 million who want to finish college if they could, but they can't. And why can't they? Because without the degree, they won't be considered even for a job they can do. And so therefore they can't make enough money to ever get out of the loop. So that's the thing. We're actually less focused on changing college behavior and more focused on changing employer behavior. But I do think the implications for colleges are significant.
Well, I mean, it's impossible to disagree with you. And I do agree with you that sometimes that some employers have gotten, fairly lazy, so to speak, and have used the college degree, and we've seen some jobs that never used to require a college degree now requiring them. So, I mean, we're on the same page in terms of employer behavior. We're also on the same page in terms of the fact that universities, colleges, need to change. I mean, we have been working very closely, for example, with our network of community and technical colleges to, in fact, make it much easier to transfer credits. And to make that more straightforward, we have developed a completion degree, an online completion degree for exactly those students that have finished, more than half of the credits. It may be 60% of the credits, to be able to, in a year and a half, finish up and get a college degree, because it is very important to them. I just want to be careful that as we're having this argument, that we're not devaluing all those other skills that college has, and that we're not giving the message, particularly low-income students, that it's not worth striving for that. I mean, the example that I sometimes give is that, I don't know about you, but, I certainly want the surgeon who is operating on me in a life and death situation. Yes, I want them to have all the technical skills in the world, but I want someone that's read poetry, that has a sense of what human life is all about as they're making these decisions. I want someone that has that broad sensibility, and I just want to make sure that as we're having these debates, that actually isn't a debate. We both agree on the basics, that we're not somehow giving the message to low-income students that they shouldn't be striving to go to universities, and that we're not giving states a way of pulling out. States have been divesting in higher education, and we don't want to give them more impetus to do that.
So what are the elements of this, let's say this what I call the higher bar, the new bundle of higher ed? What really should be, what's in the bundle of a new higher ed of a 4-year, let's not call it a bachelor's degree experience? What belongs in this bundle right now? What would differentiate it from taking what President Wingard talked earlier about? You could take a master class, or you could get on LinkedIn Learning. What would college get you that LinkedIn Learning doesn't get you?
Well, like I say, I think it does, a number of different things. One is that it makes sure that your education is broad. And, this is really important. The kinds of decisions that we're going to be making in the high-tech world, for example, ethics is a really important part of that. We want, just think about the kinds of issues that we are dealing with. And so we want someone that, again, has a broad sense of it, that understands history, and, how the cyclical cycles that we see in history, that, so we want them to have the strong database skills. We've developed, we want to make sure that all our students have data analytics skills, but that they have them within the context of these larger sensibilities, that they can think critically and creatively. Critical thinking is so key in this world where, it used to be that you had to go to a university just to have access to the great books. Now I have access to more books, in this than any, one library has, but I'm also flooded with misinformation. And those very critical learning skills, the ability to see things from multiple vantage points. These are skills that are forged in the humanities and social sciences, which often is not part of skill-based learning. But again, I also think that a key part of a college experience is what's happening outside the classroom, and the ways in which we provide students a whole host of leadership experiences that they can have, including we have clubs for student entrepreneurs that are starting their first businesses. So, it's both inside and outside the classroom. But I do think, and I want to be clear, that universities can be more flexible about not having this, it's 4-year graduation rate that allows students to, take time and, let's say, work for a year before coming back to finish up with their degree, or to do a quarter internship, or to do study abroad, or to go home and take care of their family if that's what's needed for a while, and then come back.
Yeah. Goldie, I really want to take your question seriously about what that bundle like needs to be. And I think we've got to just recognize that universities exist within a society, within an economy, with its history and so forth. It's not just the universities. I mean, we all know this, but if we take that fact seriously and the world as it is seriously, then it really, what would be the bundle for universities really depends on the question opportunity at work is focused on, which is this. If you need to have a bachelor's degree to have access to to even have a shot at middle-class job, right? Like more or less, which is the way things have been trending, right? Until a few years ago, it's sort of moving a little bit in the other direction, but not very much yet. But just the order of magnitude, 40% of Americans have bachelor's degrees, 75% of new job postings said bachelor's degrees were required, like including in fields that are dominated by people. So in other words, it's a math problem that you don't even need a university degree to recognize, because it's a math problem that represents, tens of millions of people. And of course, and there's all sorts of distortions on the labor market side, but let's bring it back to higher ed. In a world where that was actually true, where in order to have a chance at a middle-class life, you needed a bachelor's degree, well, then the bundle of higher ed should include free tuition. It should include income support because it's not just free tuition, right? It's like income support. And maybe you could have, like ISA bundled in there, but you'd still need the income support because people don't have the cash, their family. So if you actually were to say, this has to be the path to the middle class. By the way, you need a lot more quality seats than you have today, right, in higher education. And the price tag for all of that would be a couple of orders of magnitude more than I've heard anyone saying they're investing, not even just like the backsliding. So I just want us to be really, really clear what it would actually mean, because you could say that, right? It's like you could say you have to have a bachelor's degree to do that. But if you did, and you weren't just gaslighting people, then that would be the ticket. The bundle would be that. I don't think you need to change all that much about what universities do today. I think universities are great, but it's expensive and very few, relatively few people have access to them, like in that way. So I wouldn't be like radically changing higher education for that, like in terms of like what a great liberal arts college experience was. But I just think the implications of that are just massive, and not just for people coming forward, for the people that exist today. And and so I think, but then there's the role that universities can uniquely play, right? That none of these other pathways can play. And to me, that's less about how they educate, because as you say, you can read the great books in a university or not, but what you can't do is develop a clear disciplinary sense. What does it mean to sort of practice this way? And in some cases, in an interdisciplinary sense. So in my experience, having engineers that are trained in the classics as such is not necessarily going to solve the AI ethics problems. But if you actually were to establish norms, what it means to be an engineer, embedded in that is a set of ethical norms like the Hippocratic Oath for doctors. You had an equivalent for engineering. That is something that universities could do that would make a huge difference and that no one else can do. And so I think that's more at an institutional level than just at what ethics someone comes away with at the university. Universities can change whole disciplines and whole fields. And I would put a lot of the focus at the higher end there.
Yeah,
Byron, as you were saying that, I was just thinking back to, the policy and imperatives of the Obama administration, where they sort of tried to make sort of the new national norm 2 years of post-secondary education, not just necessarily at a community college, but 2 years of some training beyond high school. But that was pretty much of a job market kind of orientation, I think, at the time,
Yeah. I just want to, first of all, I just want to say that, I agree that you can read the classics on your own, but there's something very different about having a discussion about them in a classroom full of people from all different backgrounds that are pushing you and making you think differently. And again, I want to stress that college is often the most diverse setting that anyone has ever been in, because our neighborhoods are resegregating. But the other is that, I think, I agree that, that there's some push involved in getting to this notion where college really is accessible at a reasonable price to everybody. But some states are really making progress. If you look at, at our state, and again, some, universities, have 40,000 plus students like we do. And if you look at our state, between its community colleges, which are very strong, many of whom in fact offer a 4-year degree as well, and our system of 4-year universities, we really have a very good funding model because of the Washington College Grant that covers tuition at public 2- and 4-year colleges for students below 70% of the median family income, which is up to about $65,000 a year. And it makes us a national leader in college affordability. And interestingly, how this happened is it's a tax on businesses that benefit the most from an educated local workforce. Businesses like Microsoft and Amazon were in favor of taxing themselves to make college more affordable. That tells you something about what businesses think about a college educated workforce. Again, we're not debating. I think that, that employers have been at times, way too that it's good to, I want to see people without a college degree paid more. There's no question our state was at the forefront of, $15, or our county was at the forefront of $15 an hour wages. So I am all in favor of, lifting the wages and making more possible. But I also think that this notion of making college more affordable is not a pipe dream. I think it can happen.
And the number of seats, do you think they're sufficient in Washington State for the sort of middle class? Because there's affordability and then there's number of quality seats. I mean, another initiative of the Obama administration was, to try to address the issue of for-profit schools, many of which were not providing great education, was more of a marketing play. But I mean, why was their marketing successful? To me, it's because people know they need something more, but they don't know how to get it, right? And so that's what's being marketed to them. But the number of quality seats, it seems to me, even relative to what I believe is required, like colleges really do serve better than other ways. I think there's not nearly enough quality seats in college. I think we haven't been growing that in the same way. But at the same time, on the other end, we've been arbitrarily restricting people from doing what they actually can do in the name of college. And again, I want to be very clear. To my knowledge, colleges haven't said to do this.
Right.
But the negativity around college that I find very disturbing, it's very widespread in segments of society, it has a lot to do with the fact that that's where the finger is pointed as to why I know what I can do, but no one will give me a chance.
Yeah, there's no question that, that colleges at times, and I've been, fighting this notion of colleges bragging about how many students can't get in and using that as a bragging point. I think that is really,
that's the main bragging point, right? That's the US News ratings. So,
well, and what I'm saying is, even within the AAU, which is the top schools, there are many of us that are actively fighting against that, because, I can tell you, we can't take all the students that apply to us, but I take no pleasure in that. And I would love, and I'm very happy that I am part of a 4-year system and a community college system where, in fact, we have enough seats for people that are ready to go to college. And we could expand if that happened. Right now, the particular moment that we're in, and I think it's important to think about that, is we've got a demographic cliff. So there's going to be fewer college age going students. And in fact, partly as a result of COVID, we've seen a real drop in low income students applying to college. And so again, I think the question isn't, one or the other, but how do we unite so that it's not an either or? And how do we make sure that as we focus on, alternative ways of getting skills, that we don't give a message that we shouldn't be expanding access to four-year colleges.
Yeah, this
Well-
discussion about income inequality and sort of the role that higher education may or may not be playing in that, and also the concerns about a backlash, it's really got me thinking a little bit about the signal of the degree. Does it signal education? Is it or is it more of just at this point a socioeconomic signal? And how do we make it not just be
Well, it's not,
the
it's,
signal of where you came from?
I mean, it's clearly not just one thing. I mean, and I spent a lot of time talking to employers about this. And I think you know, if you're looking for someone to help you design a bridge, like having good discipline in structural engineering is highly
Yeah.
advisable. And and you know, but I think but what we're talking about, and if you look at I mean, I may spend more time with the labor market statistics than you. There's millions of jobs in sales. I mean, are you asserting that like a salesperson should have to have a bachelor's degree? Because in a lot of cases that's the case. And so you have, for example, millions of people without bachelor's degrees who are, let's say, second level call center people who are doing customer support, high performers in customer support. And they tend to be disproportionately women. They tend to be disproportionately stars. They tend to be disproportionately Black and Latino. And they have like much harder time moving into sales jobs that might pay twice as much and that match their skills as other people coming from sort of the same background with sort of, the same like occupational background, the same skill set applied on the job, but with a different. So what is that about? It's not just about skills. Perhaps it's about class comfort. Perhaps it's about, because again, I wish that, I mean, college may very well be the place where people encounter the most diversity, but let's just say, I mean, like the limits of that diversity in many, many settings is extreme, particularly on the socioeconomic dimension. And so I think that, but so you can gain skills for sales, you can gain skills for frontline management, you could gain skills for even analytics, right? Like, I mean, which is, I mean, again, mainly using software and using skills that you absolutely should gain in a decent high school. And so it's I just think I mean, high school, remember, was for occupational, right? The high school movement was for the jobs of the future in the first third of the 20th century. And that was meant to be general purpose skills. And universities actually were funded by the federal government before high schools were. And they were because, you needed agronomists and you needed doctors and you needed nurses and you needed surveyors. And like, these are still, there's a massive, and you needed, and frankly, I think civic education throughout, but certainly not just in college, like throughout is critical too. So I see many, many, many benefits of higher education that go way beyond the labor market. And I think that's incredibly important in discovery and so forth. And so the institutional strength of universities is an incredibly important thing to focus on. I'm just saying that it shouldn't be at the expense, just in order to elevate universities, it shouldn't be to push down and keep out of opportunity people who haven't got a college degree.
And we don't disagree.
I know we need to
wanna
wrap
just
this.
mention
I
one
know
more fact.
Go ahead, and then I want to wrap it up with one last question here.
Yeah. And that's just that, in fact, the premium, because you were saying, there's this signal class, that in fact, for higher income individuals, going to college doesn't mean much in terms of their earning. They don't need to go to college to get these alumni networks. They have them built into their families. That what you see is actually, it is low income and Black and brown people that get the most out of going to college, because for them, that's where the signaling actually matters more.
They get most out of completing college. I agree with the data in that sense. And to be clear, I think it's very well understood that is an incredibly important step, and people aren't taking it for the most part because they think it's not important. Certainly not low-income people. They're not taking it because they can't get there, because they're not supported in the right way, because they can't, something goes wrong, someone gets sick. Lots of reasons, no guidance, guidance counseling, all the rest of it. It's not because they're reading the Atlantic about like, oh, college is not that important. Like, that's not why low income
We're on the same page.
are not going to college.
I'm really glad you mentioned that thing about the wage premium, because I always wonder whether colleges made the mistake by pitching themselves as, get your $1 million, go to college, get your degree. Just to sum this up here, let's say colleges are now doing a better job than I realize, or that a lot of people realize, about providing this kind of holistic experience, or maybe some colleges are going to be moving in that direction. Just real quickly from each of you, what's the best way for colleges to kind of convey that to the public and communicate that, because maybe that message isn't getting out there right now?
Communicate, communicate, communicate. And I really think that that's important. And one of the things that we've been talking much more, I mean, I just gave an annual address and was really talking about to my faculty about the importance of really being community engaged and going out there and talking and showing exactly, what it is. And I do think that COVID did bring us back that way. We used to go out and send our student ambassadors out into the high schools, not just to tell them about the value of what we do in college, but also that it's a lot more affordable at public schools, at public universities, than people know. And we weren't able to do that during the time of COVID. And we have to double down and go out there and talk to families as directly as possible, and to go ahead and, as I like to say, I'm a developmental psychologist, not only publish in peer-reviewed journals, but write an article in Family Circle and make sure that we are talking to people where they are.
That's great. And that was your term, global and local, right? That you used in that
Yes.
address. I saw that. And Byron, finish it off. I know we're
Great.
But
Well,
I'm
I
gonna
agree with that as
make it
far
tight.
as I agree with that as far as it goes. But I think if you look at the data, Pew and others, we're at a very low trust ebb in our society for all institutions, which is a practical matter, means that nobody believes what you say until they see what you do. And so, like, in addition to the talking and reaching out, which I do agree with, I think to the extent that colleges have learning resources that I think are fundamental for, employability, or fundamental for, like, I would try very hard to make those widely available to people in your community and your relevant that aren't enrolled in your college, and not just the say it, but show it, do it, invite
Yes.
them, make
Agreed.
it acceptable, use the fact that you can use sort of digital, like all the rest of it, to make that
Yes.
acceptable. And by the way, and then try to, since you have the power already from employers of credentialing, try to credential, make that a credential, not the whole 4 years, that thing.
Agreed.
And
Agreed.
use it and encourage employers who are using your degree as a screen out signal to use that credential, that much more accessible credential, as a screen in signal. That would be doing, not just saying. And I think showing is essential right now, because we're all Missouri now. You got to show me. No one believes you.
Great. Hey, this has been fantastic. Obviously, we could go on for a couple more
Yeah.
hours here on this conversation, but they're going to give us the hook. So I just want to take this moment to thank you both for joining me in the conversation. And I think this higher bar question and what's next for higher ed is going to just continue to be a really important one. And I will I'll turn it back to Ian at this point. Thank you
Great.
both.
Appreciate everybody spending the time.
Thank you.
Thanks.